The skies above Washington, D.C. were crystal clear that spring morning. Aboard Air Force Two, the atmosphere was calm but carried a sense of anticipation. Vice President JD Vance, known for his sharp intellect and fierce loyalty to President Donald Trump, was on a diplomatic visit to Europe. Accompanying him was his wife, Usha Vance, and their precocious 5-year-old daughter, Mirabel Vance, a girl with sparkling eyes, endless curiosity, and a heart too tender for the harshness of politics. This trip was unlike any other. The highlight of their visit was a private audience with Pope Francis in the heart of Vatican City. It was a significant diplomatic gesture, one meant to highlight America's commitment to religious freedom, unity, and dialogue under the Trump administration's second term. But for Mirabel, it wasn't about politics. Her world wasn't divided into red or blue, conservative or liberal. She had only one question, one that had been gnawing at her heart since she watched a documentary about world hunger on her mother's iPad. If God is real, why does he let little children suffer? Mirabel hadn't told her parents she was going to ask the Pope this question. In her innocent world, grown-ups always had answers. And surely the Pope, who was said to speak to God himself, would give her the truth. The Vice President's motorcade rolled through the cobblestone streets of Vatican City with all the ceremonial grandeur one would expect. Swiss guards stood at attention. A line of cardinals greeted the American delegation with warm handshakes and rehearsed smiles. Mirabel held her mother's hand tightly, her small dress fluttering in the breeze, eyes wide at the magnificent beauty of St. Peter's Basilica. JD Vance, typically composed and calculated, was noticeably more relaxed today. The Vatican was a place that reminded him of his grandmother's faith back in Ohio, the woman who raised him, the woman who taught him to believe in something greater than himself. "Are you excited, sweetheart?" he asked Mirabel as they were led toward the Apostolic Palace. Mirabel nodded slowly but didn't smile. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you think the Pope knows God for real?" JD blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I think if anyone does, it's him," he said with a gentle smile. "Why do you ask?" Mirabel shrugged. I need to know. Really know." Before he could probe further, a soft voice in English interrupted them. "Vice President Vance, the Holy Father is ready to receive you." Inside the grand chamber, golden light streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful hues across ancient marble floors. Pope Francis, dressed in simple white, stood waiting with his serene smile, a man who had met presidents, kings, and dignitaries, yet always treated children with the reverence they deserved. As JD and Usha greeted the pontiff, Mirabel stood back, gripping a tiny notebook she always carried filled with crayon drawings and big questions written in childlike scrawl. Pope Francis noticed her and with a warmth that transcended languages, knelt slightly to her level. "And who is this little angel?" he asked in soft, accented English. Mirabel stepped forward. "My name is Mirabel Vance," she said shyly. "I'm 5. My daddy is the vice president." The Pope chuckled gently. "Ah, then you must be the most important one in the room." Mirabel looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "Can I ask you a real question?" JD and Usha exchanged glances. The room fell still. "Of course," Pope Francis replied, folding his hands, leaning forward. Mirabel took a deep breath. "Do God really exist?" There was no giggle, no awkward laughter. The Pope didn't deflect. Instead, he looked into her eyes, deeply, quietly, and something about the atmosphere in the room shifted. JD Vance's heart skipped a beat. Usha's eyes began to glisten. The Swiss guard at the door straightened ever so slightly. Pope Francis didn't answer right away. He slowly rose, motioned for Mirabel to walk with him toward a nearby stained glass window depicting Jesus surrounded by children. "Come, let us talk," he said softly. Mirabel followed, clutching her notebook. Behind them, silence, anticipation, and something else. Something holy. The light from the stained glass window bathed them in vibrant reds, blues, and golds. Pope Francis gently lowered himself onto a carved wooden bench, and Mirabel climbed up beside him. The Pope rested his hands on his knees, leaning slightly toward her, treating her not as a child to be patronized, but as a soul seeking truth. "So, you want to know," he said, "if God really exists?" Mirabel nodded, her voice a whisper. "Sometimes I hear people say he's not real. That he's just pretend. And if he is real, then why does he let so many bad things happen?" The old man didn't flinch. Instead, his face grew even softer, lined with thought. "I have asked that question myself," he said. "Even popes cry. Even popes wonder." Mirabel blinked. "You cry?" He nodded. "When I was a young boy in Argentina, I saw my neighbors go hungry. I saw children sleep in the streets. I prayed and asked God why. And I heard nothing. I thought he had gone silent." Mirabel opened her notebook and showed him a page she had drawn the night before, a globe with stick-figure children around it, some smiling, some with tears. She had written in bright red crayon. The Pope stared at the drawing for a long time. "Let me tell you a story, Mirabel," he began. He told her about Saint Teresa of Calcutta, who once felt God's silence for decades, even as she helped the sick and dying. She couldn't feel him, the Pope explained. But she kept serving, kept loving. And in doing that, she became the answer to someone else's prayer. Mirabel listened intently, her small fingers tracing the edge of the bench. Sometimes, the Pope said, God isn't in the thunder. He's in the whisper. Sometimes he speaks through people like you. Me, she said, genuinely surprised. Yes, he nodded. You felt sadness when you saw those children on your screen, didn't you? She nodded slowly. They looked hungry. Their eyes were big and sad. And what did you feel inside? I wanted to help them, she said, her voice cracking just a little. That Mirabel, that is God. He lives inside that feeling, that push to help, to love. He may not stop every bad thing from happening, but he sends people like you to fight against it. The girl was quiet for a long time. Her bottom lip trembled. But why doesn't he stop the bad stuff before it happens? The Pope sighed, looking down at his weathered hands. Because he gave us free will. And with that freedom comes choices. Some people choose kindness, others choose cruelty. But every time someone chooses love, the world changes. Mirabel leaned her head against his arm. JD and Usha, watching from a few feet away, were speechless. The Vice President, a man known for strong opinions and political combat, felt something stir deep in his chest, a mix of awe and a kind of helplessness. Usha squeezed his hand, overcome with emotion. Pope Francis then turned to Mirabel and asked, "Would you like to see something special?" She nodded. He stood and led her down a hallway flanked by paintings and quiet candlelight. They entered a small private chapel, empty, still, holy. He knelt at the altar and whispered, "This is where I come when I feel alone. I ask God questions here too." Mirabel joined him. She didn't know the rituals. She didn't know the prayers. But she knew what it meant to be still. Then the Pope said, "You asked me if God is real. My answer is yes, but not because I see miracles in the sky. I see him in people like you who cry for others and want to help. The moment you felt love for someone else, that was him." Mirabel burst into tears, not the loud, panicked tears of a frightened child, but slow, soft sobs of deep, emotional release. She covered her eyes with her hands. The Pope wrapped an arm around her, whispering in her ear in Spanish, then English. "You carry God with you, little one. You are proof he exists." And for the first time since asking the question, Mirabel didn't feel alone. She felt seen. The private chapel remained silent, save for the soft flicker of candle flames. Mirabel's tears had slowed, but she stayed close to Pope Francis, quietly absorbing the warmth and serenity of the space. JD and Usha Vance stood near the entrance, moved beyond words. Usha pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her daughter's pain and wonder as if it were her own. JD, usually grounded in pragmatism, found himself questioning things he hadn't touched in years. Faith had always been complicated for him, wrapped in his Appalachian upbringing, mixed with memories of poverty, grit, and longing. He had seen too much to believe blindly, but also just enough to never completely stop believing. Pope Francis sat beside Mirabel again, speaking gently. "You asked the most important question anyone can ask. Even the oldest of us do not have all the answers. But God is not a puzzle to solve. He is love, and love is something we live, not something we understand." Mirabel wiped her cheeks with her sleeve. "So, he lives in the love we feel." "Yes," the Pope said, his eyes glistening now too. "And in the love we give." He took her hand, fragile and small in his weathered fingers, and placed it over her heart. "Feel that?" She nodded. "Each beat is a gift. That heartbeat is his whisper to you, you matter. You are loved. And I am with you." A silence followed, reverent and still. Then Mirabel whispered, "I want to help more people. Not just think about it. Do something." The Pope smiled. "Then you are already a little apostle." She tilted her head. "What's an apostle?" "Someone who spreads light," he replied. "Someone who brings God into places where people have forgotten how to hope." Mirabel considered this, scribbling the word apostle in her notebook, sounding it out phonetically as apostle. Then came a small knock at the chapel door. A young Monsignor poked his head in and nodded solemnly toward the Pope. The time for the next delegation was drawing near. The moment was coming to an end, but it had already changed everything. "Before you go," the Pope said, standing, "I have something for you." He walked to a wooden shelf and retrieved a small, handcrafted cross, simple, elegant, worn with age. This belonged to a child who died during the Second World War. It was passed to me by a Polish cardinal many years ago. He told me to give it to someone who could carry its story forward. I think it belongs with you now. Mirabel took it gently as though it were made of glass. Thank you, she whispered, reverently holding it close. The Pope knelt again, pressing his forehead to hers in a quiet, sacred blessing. Remember, when you feel afraid or unsure, this cross is a reminder that love wins. Always. JD Vance stepped forward now, a lump in his throat, trying to regain his composure. Your Holiness, he said, voice low but sincere, thank you. You didn't just answer her question. You've reminded us all what this life should be about. The Pope smiled and clasped his hand. Raise her well. Let her questions bloom, not be silenced. She will grow into a voice this world needs. As they turned to leave, Mirabel looked up at her father. Daddy, she asked, do you think God is proud of me? JD paused, then knelt and took her hands in his. I think God just saw you today and smiled. The Vice President and his family walked out of the chapel into the radiant Vatican courtyard. The sun had moved, casting long golden shadows. But something felt different now. Lighter, fuller, as if the air itself had been stirred by something sacred. Back at the U.S. Embassy residence in Rome that evening, Mirabel sat on the balcony, drawing in her notebook. She had added a new page, herself and Pope Francis sitting together in the chapel, with the words in careful, childlike writing above them. God lives in love. I saw him today. The next morning, a photograph taken by a Vatican aide began circulating quietly through select newswires. It showed a tender moment inside the small chapel. Pope Francis with his forehead pressed to the crown of a little girl's head. Her eyes were closed, hands clasped around a wooden cross, her entire posture drenched in quiet reverence. At first, only religious publications picked it up. Then the story caught fire. Pope Francis comforts daughter of U.S. Vice President JD Vance in private meeting. 5-year-old Mirabel asks, do God really exist? Pope's answer leaves her in tears. In a world of politics, a child asks the most honest question. By the time JD and Usha returned with Mirabel to the U.S. Embassy residence that evening, the story was on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and Catholic World Report alike. Commentators from all ends of the ideological spectrum were talking, not arguing for once but genuinely talking. This isn't about politics, said one morning show anchor. This is about the power of a child's question, and the honesty of a man who leads the Catholic Church answering without evasion. That day, social media shifted. Among the noise and division, there emerged something else. Contemplation. Parents began posting videos of their children answering the same question. Do you believe in God? And the answers ranged from silly to profound. God lives in my dog, one boy said. He talks to me when I feel scared, another whispered. The hashtag Mirabel moment began trending by sunset. At the Capitol, JD Vance sat in his office, staring at the live feed on his muted television screen. He saw images of his daughter across the nation, heard her voice quoted in congressional hallways, on podcasts, even in sermons. His phone buzzed constantly. A message from President Trump. Saw the video. Incredible. Remind her how proud I am. That's real leadership. Straight from the heart. A voicemail from Tucker Carlson. That moment between your daughter and the Pope? It just reminded the country of something bigger than all this noise. It's a gift, JD. Even his fiercest critics took a breath. On The View, Joy Behar surprisingly said, forget politics for a second. That little girl asked the question all of us have wondered. And she got an answer most of us needed to hear. Usha, meanwhile, was watching quietly. She didn't like the attention, but she understood the necessity. If this moment was going to ripple out into the world, it should do so with honesty and clarity. She helped Mirabel prepare a short message recorded on a phone and posted to the official White House social pages. Mirabel, holding her notebook in one hand and her cross in the other, looked directly into the camera. Hi, I'm Mirabel. Thank you for all the nice words. I still don't understand everything about God, but I know He loves us and we should love each other. That's what Pope Francis told me. That's what I believe. Bye. In just under a minute, the video received over 5 million views. At bedtime, Mirabel curled into her pillows, the cross resting beside her on the nightstand. Mommy, she whispered as Usha tucked her in, do you think that little boy who used to own the cross is in heaven? Usha paused, emotion welling in her chest. I think he is, she said, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's forehead. And I think tonight he's proud that you're carrying his story forward. Mirabel smiled. Maybe I'll meet him one day. You just might. Then, softly, she added, and I'll tell him I saw God once, in a quiet room, with a gentle old man and a candle that never went out. 3 months later, America still hadn't stopped talking about that day in the Vatican. What started as an innocent question from a 5-year-old had transformed into something far bigger, a cultural moment, a spiritual spark, and for many, a pause in the unending noise of modern life. Churches saw surges in attendance. Children's ministries reported a spike in interest. Even secular schools started engaging in conversations about empathy, meaning, and emotional intelligence, all under the banner of what's now called the Mirabel moment. At a school in Kansas, a teacher wrote the question, "Do God really exist?" across her chalkboard. Rather than correct the grammar, she asked her students what it made them feel. Hands shot up. Ideas bloomed. Some spoke of science, others of family, others of loss. And in those moments, something beautiful happened. No one shouted each other down. Meanwhile, at Georgetown University, a theology professor constructed an entire seminar course titled Modern Faith and Childlike Wonder, the Theology of Honest Questions. Enrollment maxed out within an hour. And at home in Washington, D.C., in the heart of the Vice President's official residence at the Naval Observatory, JD Vance found himself changed in ways he hadn't expected. He was still the same driven man, policy-focused, data-hardened, steeped in the battles of American governance. But something had cracked open inside him. He began ending his speeches with moments of reflection. He visited children's hospitals quietly, away from cameras. He started asking questions, too, not to his staff, but to himself. Am I doing enough to make this world kinder for my daughter? One chilly morning, he sat with Mirabel in their backyard, both wrapped in scarves. She had a new notebook now, sky blue with a rainbow sticker on the front. She was drawing again. He peeked over her shoulder. It was a picture of herself standing on a globe, holding the cross, a beam of light stretching from her chest into the sky. What's that? He asked gently. That's me, she said. And that's the light I carry. Pope Francis said I bring God where people forget. JD swallowed hard. You've brought a lot of light, kiddo. Mirabel tilted her head. Did I do good, Daddy? You did more than good. You reminded a whole country what truth looks like when it's asked with a pure heart. She leaned her head against his arm. Will you help me help more people? I will, he whispered. And he meant it. That spring, JD and Usha launched the Mirabel Foundation, aimed at funding early childhood education, emotional development, and spiritual literacy in underserved communities. Their mission was clear: to protect and nurture children who ask honest questions and to ensure they're heard. On the day of its launch, Mirabel spoke briefly at the podium, standing on a step stool in a white dress with gold trim. I asked a big question. And I didn't get a big answer. I got a small one. But it grew bigger every day. God doesn't shout. He whispers in our hearts. And we're supposed to pass it on. That quote appeared on the front page of the New York Times the next morning, right below a headline that read, "The Little Girl Who Brought America to Its Knees." In the Vatican, Pope Francis watched the speech from his residence. He smiled, nodded, and closed his eyes in silent prayer. Back in D.C., Mirabel hung her wooden cross above her bed and tucked her notebook into a special drawer, filled now with drawings, prayers, and ideas. She had a new question to ask, one she wrote down that night before sleep, with big block letters and a heart drawn beside it. How can I share God's love more tomorrow? And as she closed her eyes, she didn't feel alone anymore. Because somewhere, in the soft rustling of the trees, in the warmth of her family's arms, and in the quiet whisper of her own heart, God answered.